What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So I gotta say, it has been quite a while since Whispers of the Old Gods came out, and a lot of the cards, especially the Old Gods themselves, have started to see less and less play, especially considering the nerf to Riousx. Still though, the Old Gods are definitely really strong cards and could come back at any point in the future, and they're pretty important to the story and really just the lore of the game as well. Most of you guys probably know Cthulhu, Yogg-Saron, and Y'Shaarj pretty well, since they're really iconic and just really awesome and powerful cards in general. But they definitely could have turned out a lot differently, and we've got some information on what the developers tried and tested for some different versions of the Old God cards. So today we're taking a look back before the release of the Old Gods expansion to find out different versions of what the Old Gods could have been and how they could have potentially changed the game. So jumping right into it, first up we're taking a look at Y'Shaarj. So the first couple versions of Y'Shaarj actually had a very similar effect to Riousx actually, where Y'Shaarj would replace your hero, except that it would do it at the start of the game as long as you had Y'Shaarj somewhere in your deck, kind of similar to how Prince Malchezaar works. The Y'Shaarj hero had 15 health, and a few different hero powers were tested for it, although pretty much all of them were super broken. One of the hero powers tested drew a card, and if it was a minion, it got put into play as a 1/1 creature. Now this pretty much gave you a combination of two different improved hero powers, life tap without taking the damage, and reinforce, except instead of vanilla 1/1s, you would get things like 1/1 Ragnaroses or 1/1 Ysera's. Now it's pretty awkward that you maybe don't get to decide between which effect you get, but if you're drawing cards to look for some kind of board wipe or perhaps an answer, they're generally going to be spells anyway, so you draw them with the effect, and you could just stack your deck full of really powerful minions to get as 1/1 since you're guaranteed to get a repeatable Barnes type of effect. Sure, your life total gets set to 15 at the start, but it's probably worth it to get such a powerful hero power. But that hero power is actually nothing compared to how broken the next hero power that they tried was. So the next hero power the devs tried to make work in this version of Y'Shaarj made the next card that you cast cost health instead of mana. So let's take a second to think about some of the combos that you could potentially pull off with this version of Y'Shaarj. So first of all, Y'Shaarj was guaranteed to be your hero at the start of the game as long as it was in your deck. You would get it on turn 1, turn 0. So you could literally build your entire deck full of high cost legendaries and be absolutely guaranteed to cast one as soon as you could use your hero power on turn 2, which means early Ysera's, quick kills with Alexstrasza, all sorts of crazy stuff. Sure, it's true it would cost you life and so you could get pretty low, but who really cares if you're playing, Ysera on turn 2 in the game or something like that. Either way, both the designs for Y'Shaarj hero powers were pretty darn broken, I gotta say, so it's not surprising that the card ended up in a very toned down form and in the actual version that it is today. Next up, we're taking a look at Cthulhu, which actually ended up being changed the least out of all the Old God cards. Definitely still had some really cool stuff going on with it though. Most of the, if your Cthulhu has 10 or more attack kind of cards, you used to actually get whatever buff equal to Cthulhu's stats. For example, Ancient Shieldbearer would have read instead gain armor equal to Cthulhu's attack as an example, and all the other cards work like that as well. And this is a pretty interesting concept, but honestly I gotta say it would probably be pretty darn broken, especially if you got a really big Cthulhu, so it's definitely not a surprise that they ended up in their current forms. The other cool concept that ended up getting removed is that all the cards that buffed Cthulhu not only had synergy with Cthulhu, but originally also had synergy with each other. For example, there were designs for cards that dealt 1 damage randomly for every Cthulhu related card that had died that game so far, and another that summoned tentacles for every Cthulhu related card that had died in the game. Now these versions are definitely a really sick concept and could have potentially added a lot of depth and complexity to Cthulhu decks, but Blizzard wanted the Cthulhu deck style to be really accessible to beginners and really very linear and kind of like a paint by numbers sort of deck, so it did kind of make sense that they, did away with some of their more complicated concepts and mechanics. And next up, we're taking a look at Yogg-Saron. So some of the versions that were tried with Yogg-Saron, I gotta say, were actually pretty darn crazy. So the first design of Yogg-Saron was a 10 mana minion that was a 10/10 creature that made all of your spells cost 1 mana. but in return only gave you 15 seconds to take your turn every turn. Now this is a super crazy effect, and making yourself have a one-sided Nozdormu the whole game is actually really insane. But that version of Yogg would actually be so ridiculous in the Aviana Kun combo deck, since you could make all your spells and minions cost only 1 mana, although I guess it would be pretty hard to go off with only 15 seconds. There was also another version of Yogg Saron that was a 4 mana 8/8 creature that let you gain 3 mana crystals when the game started, but it capped your max mana crystals at 4 for the entire game, which is a really cool concept since it essentially gives you like this insane early game, but you just like totally lose if you don't kill your opponent instantly and they're able to regain the board. Now the devs ended up doing away with that design since it actually created, after playtesting it, they realized that it created pretty linear and actually kind of boring gameplay. You know, there wasn't much variance to it. Another version of Yogg Saron was just a 5 mana 10/10 minion that shortened all of your turns to 15 seconds, which again is a pretty cool design, but seeing how many bugs Nozdormu had, well, it's not surprising that they rejected this design for technical reasons. After this, Blizzard kind of decided on having Yogg cast a bunch of spells, although the original version of that effect just cast a copy of each spell that you had already cast that game, although with random targets instead. And this actually ended up being totally broken, you know, with things like Vanish and all sorts of combos. You know, you could bounce and recast your Yogg over and over, recasting a bunch of beneficial spells each time. You know, you could play things that had no negative effects, like maybe secrets or like stuff like Sinister Strike or something like that, and just slowly and miserably killing your opponent with some insane value. And at this point, we arrived pretty much at the current version of Yogg Saron, or at least what is now the pre-nerf version of Yogg Saron, with his stats being changed to being a 7/5, so that the spells were the really OP ability and not the body of Yogg Saron himself. But in taking a look at these development cycles, there's a lot of really cool information that we can draw from this. You know, first of all, Blizzard is clearly a lot more adventurous with cards in their design processes that a lot of people think. You know, a lot of the old gods' original designs were just completely broken or like totally ridiculous mechanics. You know, obviously they definitely do test the cards they design a lot and try their best to weed out the broken things, but it's cool to see that Blizzard is exploring a lot of really just ridiculous, absurd design space that a lot of people probably think that they might never even touch. And it's also kind of interesting that Blizzard only does internal testing. You know, sure, it means that they get to keep things secret and reuse designs and stuff, but since it's an electronic game, it could be interesting to see something like, you know, like the PBE in League of Legends or like the PTR in Overwatch, except for Hearthstone, where legend players or streamers or just, you know, a bunch of random people get invited to test broken cards and give some feedback on them. Sure, that's something that's probably not going to happen, and if it does happen, it's going to be pretty far away in the future. But as more and more expansions come out and possibly even more formats get released, it is going to be pretty hard for Blizzard's testing team to test all the new cards with all the old cards in every format and stuff, so it would be pretty cool to see something like that, even if the first versions were like really exclusive and maybe only open to like friends and family of Blizzard, or I don't know, maybe just like a really small select group of like randomly picked players or something like that. The other kind of cool thing we saw in these development cycles is that Blizzard experimented a lot with alternate heroes and like timer changes with the old gods. While alternate heroes are something we probably will see a lot more of as time goes on, stuff like similar to Riousx at least, since Blizzard does seem to be pretty fond of that concept, or at least fond of attempting to make that concept work further. In addition to Riousx, we know that we probably won't see anything related to timer changes for quite a while, since the devs have stated that there are actually a ton of bugs in it, and it's something that would be actually pretty unplayable on mobile versions of the game. Overall though, those are some of our thoughts on the old gods and what they could have been. Which design for the old gods that didn't make it into the game is maybe your favorite? Definitely let us know in the comments section below, and it looks like that's going to be it from me, so if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.